The first thing we want to talk about when talking about decimals is place values. We all know the place values to the left of the decimal point. We have the ones column, the tens column, the hundreds columns, the thousands, the 10,000s, the 100,000s column, the millions columns, and of course you can keep going all the way to trillions and billions and quadrillions and so on. But we need to, in this lesson we're going to focus on the values to the right of the decimal place. You'll see that the first one is called the tenths, the next one the hundredths, the next one after that the thousandths, and then the 10,000ths. I always remember these because they've got a THS on them. Anything to the right of the decimal place has a THS, and it makes you spit just a little. You know, the tenths, the hundredths. A little hard to say. And so these are the columns that we'll be focusing on in this class. And it's important to know those because when we read a number, for example, 0.3, we call this number 3/10. Or if we had the number 0.64, well, that's 64 hundredths. We always say these decimal values with respect to their lowest value or their most far right place value. So for example, if I had 0.317, I would call this 317 thousandths. And that's how we say decimals when speaking in words. This can really help us as well because if we are able to say these right, if I can say 3/10 or 64 hundredths, it's going to allow us to convert these decimals to fractions whenever we want to, very simply. Let me clear the screen and we'll talk about that. Okay, so we like to convert decimals to fractions, and if we can say them correctly, it's very easy to be able to do this. So, for example, 0.3, to convert 0.3, I know when I say that it's 3/10. So to write that as a fraction, we would just write 3/10, 3/10. One rule is that however many decimal places you have is how many zeros you're going to have after the 1. So if I was converting the number 64 hundredths, I would write 64/100. Notice there's 2 decimal places, and because of that I'm going to write 2 zeros. Now this fraction simplifies more, and so we do always want to simplify our fractions. I can divide the top and bottom by 2, and I would get 32/50. Looks like I can still simplify that by dividing by 2 again. I would get 16/25. Great. What about 0.317? How would I write that as a fraction? Well, to do that, it's 317 over, because there's 3 decimal places, I'm going to put 3 zeros. 317/1000. That's how we can convert fractions to decimals. Let's have you guys try some of these. Go ahead and pause the video, and I'm going to give you some problems here. And right when I give you those, go ahead and pause the video and work on these in your notebook. See if you can convert these from decimals to fractions. Here's the problems we'd like you to try. 0.25, 0.7, and 0.3167. Pause the video and convert these decimals to fractions. Make sure to simplify all the way down if you can. Okay, so how did you do? Let's check your answers here. So here I have 2 decimal places, so I'm going to write this as 25 over, and because there was 2 decimal places, I'm putting 2 zeros after the 1. We then could simplify this by dividing the top and the bottom by 25. That would leave me with 1/4. 0.25 as a fraction is 1/4. Let's take a look at this one. Here we just have 1 decimal place, so it would be 7/10. That's all you can do with that one. Here I have 1, 2, 3, 4 decimal places, so after this 1, I'm going to put 4 zeros. And then write in this number here, 3167. 3167/10,000. How'd you do? Hopefully you did well converting those decimals to fractions. Well, let's move on to the next part. Another thing we're going to need to be able to do is work with addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division with decimals. We did this in R2 with fractions. Now we want to be able to do it with decimals. When dealing with decimals, this is something that you probably learned before And maybe you remember or maybe you don't, but what we're going to do really is just focus on, like we did with the fractions, working on this in our calculator. In your calculator, you have a decimal point, and you can do addition, subtraction, subtraction and division and multiplication. Another cool thing is that you can actually, on your calculator, you're going to want to find this F to D button, because you can convert any fraction to a decimal and any decimal to a fraction. For example, we just did 0.7. If I typed in 0.7, I could push this button and it would convert it to 7/10, which was our answer. And you can do this with any fraction. And so 0.22, for example, I could convert that. That would be 22 over 100, if you remember. I'd push this button, and they gave me 11 over 50. Notice they all automatically simplified it. Your calculator automatically simplifies all fractions, which is really cool. For example, 25 over 100. I can do 25 over 100. That's 0.25. If I convert this fraction to a decimal, it says it's 1/4. So we can do all kinds of problems. We can do addition, subtraction. I can do, if I wanted to do this problem here, 3.716 times 2.044. This would probably take a little while to do by hand, and the calculator can do it really nicely. So we just would type in 3.716 times 2.044, push the enter button, and we've got it. Let's try another one. What about 1.76 minus 0.032? Well, to do this problem, we can do it simply in the calculator. I would just do 1.76 minus 0.032. Push the enter button, and we get our answer. You can even hit the F to D button to convert it to a fraction if you were asked to report the answer in a fraction. And so again, you can just push that F to D button as many times as you want, and it'll just go back and forth between fractions and decimals. So when doing decimals, let's use our calculator. Calculator is powerful at doing that. Let's go ahead and give you guys, go ahead and take out your calculators. Let's give you 3 problems to work on. Take out your notebook and write these problems down, and then fire them up in your calculator. Let's see if you get the same answers as I did for these. So let's have you try this problem here. Let's go 7.362 minus 4.199. We'll have you try that problem. Let's have you try this problem here, 1.62. Actually, let's go, this is 81.7 divided by 1.62. And let's try a multiplication problem, 3.7 times 3.7. So try those 3 problems. Pause the video right now, and you can resume it to see if you did them right. Okay, so how did you do? Let's go ahead and work on these problems here. I'd have 7.362. Push the wrong button there. Minus 4.199. Push the enter button. If you did it by hand, that's awesome. But again, there's no by hand requirement here with these. We want you to know how to do them in your calculator. You should have got 3.163. 3.163 is our answer there. Let's look at this one. Here on this problem, we'd want to do 81.7 divided by 1.62. Make sure you did that in the right order. We would do the number in the box divided by the number on the outside, and we get this number here. Woo, that's a pretty number. Let's go ahead and write that out. 5432, 5432. I'm going to write the whole thing out. 09877. I'm going to use this for our next example. And 3.7 times 3.7. 3.7 times 3.7. That comes out to be 13.69. Great. How'd you do? Hopefully you did great. one thing that we want to talk about, the last thing we want to talk about, is what happens when we get super large numbers like these. I mean, that's annoying. You don't want to have to write that all out. And a lot of times in real life, when the numbers get that small, they don't make very much sense. For example, if this is money, you wouldn't want to tell you wouldn't want to tell your friend that you owe him $50.4320987 cents. So we need to talk about rounding. I'm going to go ahead and clear the board here. We're going to talk about rounding for a moment. Percent notation. Before we start, I'd like to share this quote with you from President Mawson in the April 2011 conference about temple work. Let's see if you can identify the percent in this problem, since we're going to be talking about percents. He says, and I quote, "Today, most of us do not have to suffer great hardships in order to attend the temple. 85% of the membership of the church now lives within 200 miles of a temple. And for the great many of us, that distance is much shorter. If you have been to the temple for yourself, and if you live relatively close proximity to a temple, your sacrifice could be setting aside the time in your busy lives to visit the temple regularly. There is much to be done." Brothers and sisters, this is a great quote, and I love it very much. Not just because of the percent. Notice the percent he gave us is 85%. But also about the power that the temple and the blessings that comes from it. Many years ago, it took a long time to build temples. There were people that sacrificed lots of time, lots of money. It took 40 years to build the Salt Lake Temple, and it was a huge sacrifice. For us now in the church, most of us, 85%, live really close, within 200 miles. If you got a car, that's less than 3 hours. And so we need to take advantage of that. We need to sacrifice a little of ourselves, maybe by just going. I'd encourage you, especially if you're here on campus, to take advantage of being 2 blocks away from the temple and sacrifice a little. The blessings that can come from it are amazing, and I testify of that. Okay. Now let's get to the math and talk about this 85%. What a percent is. So 85%, 85%. Percent. The word percent itself means of 100. Percent means of 100, and so 85%. Any percent can actually be converted into a fraction simply by writing the number over 100. I could convert this to a fraction. 85 over 100. These two things mean the exact same thing. 85% and 85 over 100 means the exact same thing. In fact, this tells us that if we had 100 members of the church, 85 of them would live within 200 miles of a temple. This fraction can actually be simplified if we divide 5 out of the top and the bottom. If we did that, divided 5, we'd get 17 over 20. So we can convert any percent into a fraction simply by writing over 100, because that's what percent means. Take a look at another example. What if I had 7%? 7%, that can be converted. 7%, it would just be 7 over 100. Okay, great. So to convert a percent to a fraction, we just write that percent over 100. Let's have you all try some. I'm going to write up 3 percents that I'd like you to convert. The first one, 30%. The next one, 12%. And the last one, 125%. Take these fractions and convert them. Take these percents and convert them to fractions. That's your goal here. Pause the video and work on this in your video notebook. And when you're done, resume the video and we'll see how you did. Okay, let's get to it. 30%, you should have said 30 over 100, because percent means of 100. And we can simplify that by dividing the top and the bottom by 10. You're always going to want to simplify if possible. Great. 12%. That's 12 over 100. And we can simplify that by dividing the top and the bottom by 2. That gives me 6 over 50. Well, it looks like it simplifies some more. Let's divide the top and the bottom again by 2. And I get 3 over 25. Great. the last one was 125%. To convert that to a fraction, we'd write 125 over 100. And we would get, if we divided the top and the bottom by 25, we'd get 5 over 4. So those are your three answers that you should have gotten in your video notebook. How'd you do? Converting percents to fractions, you just write it over 100 and simplify. Okay, great. The next thing we want to talk about is what if I have a percent and I want to convert to a decimal? Percent to a decimal. So if I want to do that, let's say I had, for example, let's go back to the 85% example. So President Hinckley's 85% example. If I want to convert that to a decimal, so it's a percent right now, and I want to convert to a decimal, you need to move the current decimal place over to the left 2 places. So if I was to think of this as 85%, well, the decimal place would be right there. And I could move it over 2 places, and that new spot would tell me what the decimal value is. And so in this situation, it's 0.85. So to convert a decimal, percent to a decimal, just move the decimal place over 2 places. We could have also seen this from the fraction that we did. These are all interrelated, all exactly the same. Remember, we said 85% was 85 hundredths. Well, that's just this. What about 27.2%? If I said write 27.2% as a decimal, what would we do? We would just move the decimal point over 2 places, which would be 0.272. That's how we convert percents to decimals. Okay, it's your turn. Let's have you guys try some. Here we go. We'd like you to convert some decimals here. The first decimal we'd like you, percent to decimal, 9.6. Convert that percent to a decimal. What about 129%? And last of all, 0.4%. Okay, your goal here is to convert these 3% to a decimal. Go ahead and pause the video and resume it when you're ready to see if you got these right. Convert from a percent to a decimal. Okay, great. How do we do? Hopefully we did all right. To convert from a percent to a decimal, you move the decimal place to the left 2 spots. So on this first one, I'd go to the left, and then I go to the left again. Now I'm going to have to put a 0 here to represent that spot. So really the correct answer for 9.6% as a decimal is 0.096. That's what we should have got on that first one, moving the decimal place to the left. Here, on 129%, the decimal place is right here, and I'm going to move it to the left 2 places. So I'm going to get 1.29. On this last one, 0.4%. I need to move the decimal place to the left 2 places. So in doing that, I'm going to have to write in some zeros to help hold the place, and our answer should be 0.004. Converting percents to decimals. Okay, so again, we want to be able to convert everything. So what if we started off with a decimal? What if I said, okay, here's a decimal. The decimal is 0.91. And I told you, okay, convert 0.91, this decimal, to a percent. Well, that would be the exact opposite of what we just did. We converted percents to decimals. When we went from a percent to a decimal, we moved the decimal place left 2 places. So if we want to go from a decimal to a percent, we'll do the exact opposite. We'll move it right 2 places. So 91 would just be 91%. 0.91 converts to 91%. If I gave you 0.037, again, we would move the decimal place 2 places, and the percent would be 3.7%. Okay, it's going to be your turn here. Let's give you some problems. I'll write them up right now. So we want you to convert 0.36 to a percent. We also want you to convert 0.02 3.1 to a percent, and also 3.26 to a percent. Go ahead and pause the video and work on these three problems. Convert these decimals to a percent. Okay, how'd we do? You should be moving the decimal place to the right 2 spots. So this first one, you'd get 36%. On the second one, you would get 3.1%. And on the last one, you would get 326%. That's converting decimals to percents. Hopefully we did all right. There's one last section we want to talk about. So what if we gave you a fraction and we said, okay, convert a fraction to a percent. So to do this, the first thing you're going to want to do is convert the fraction to a decimal. And then you can move the decimal place over 2 places. So, for example, if I gave you the fraction 3/8. Now, 3/8, that's kind of a complicated fraction. We may want to cheat here, or not cheat, but use some help. You can use your calculator. We could do 3 divided by 8. And when I type that into the calculator, it gives me 0.375. Okay, so 0.375. Remember, for the tests, you get a calculator, so this is all right. I converted the fraction to a decimal. Now, to convert the decimal to a percent, we just move the decimal place over 2 spots. And so that would give us 37.5%. This is a situation where we found all 3 of the items we're talking about. We were given a fraction, we found the decimal, and then found the percent. Let's try one more. What about 20/25? So again, we could do this in the calculator. We could do 20 divided by 25. Push the enter button. I get 0.8. So as a decimal, it's 0.8. As a percent, we need to move the decimal place over 2 spots. And when we do that, 1, 2, we need to add a 0 here. We find out that it's 80%. Okay, so that's how we convert fractions to percents. Let's have you guys try 3 of those here. I'm going to write them up. Okay, so you have 17/50. Let's do 3/4. And last of all, let's do 7/4. So your goal here is to convert these 3 fractions to percents. Go ahead and pause the video, work on these in your notebook, and then when you're ready to check your answers, resume the video. Good luck! Okay, how'd it go? 17/50. What did you do? A couple ways you could have done this. I think I would have just typed in 17 divided by 50 in my calculator. That's probably the lazy way out, but it works really nice. I get 0.34, so that's 0.34. I really wanted to get a percent, so to go from a decimal to a percent, I move the decimal place over, and I get 34%. Sweet. 3/4 was another one. If you use your calculator, you get 0.75. When you move the decimal place over 2 spots, you get 75%. That's the one, what you should have gotten there for that one. The last one was 7/4. When you type that into a calculator, you get 1.75. To convert to a decimal, we would then move the decimal place over 2 spots to the right, which gives us 175%. So there we have it. We've converted fractions to percents, decimals to percents, percents to decimals, and percents to fractions. Those are the steps to do it. We hope you had a good time here with this lesson. Remember, try to come up with some time to visit the temple. 85%. You're one of the lucky ones. Other than that, once you're ready and you're ready to move on, go ahead and move on to the assignment by pushing the start button at the bottom in the online course. Thanks for joining us, and we'll talk to you later. See you for our next lesson.